Amen, amen. Hey, y'all, please take a seat. Everybody watching with us online, at home, phone, tablet, wherever, we are so glad you guys are joining us. Well, hey, Merry Christmas, y'all. I'm excited to be back. If I'm here, last week I was out. Why? Garrison Price, member of our staff, he tested positive for COVID. He decided, hey, let's just take out all of staff with him. None of the other staff tested positive for COVID, but we've still been in quarantine for 7 days. We've all had negative tests. Garrison is doing well, and I am back. That said, I really missed you guys. Wow, that's a nicer response than I thought it'd be. You know, I loved getting to learn from Garrison. He taught through the Beatitudes. Great pastor. I loved getting to learn from my friend Fred Libran last week. If you missed it, you got to go back and hear it. It's this idea about how do you hear from God? How do you discern from that? If you missed it, you got to go back and hear it. I love, right, that last week, one of the things we talk about all the time here at the Springs is what is the church? The church is a group of people who have been transformed by the love and the grace of Jesus Christ, and from that try to walk in an uncommon faithfulness out of love for him. The church is not a building. The church is not a staff. It's not a clergy. It's not a preacher with a pulpit. The church is a people. I love that last Sunday, there was not a single paid person here. The church gathered. The church worshiped. The church discipled. And the church got after it. That's the only, yeah, you should clap for that one. If you're watching at home, we did that with you online, and that's all the way through. The faithful, discipling lay leaders, the pastors. We are a kingdom of priests of this body, and it made me really excited for the privilege I have to just be another guy doing his best to yield after Christ and run towards him with you guys. So if you're here and you're a follower of Jesus, welcome. But if you're here and you don't believe in Jesus and you're wrestling with faith, and maybe this Christmas time, this Advent season has brought you back to consideration, because maybe it carries for you what it carried for me, especially if you're part of growing up, like this nostalgia and traditionalism to it. And maybe that's why you're back considering faith, or somebody dragged you. Whatever your reason for being here, welcome. I want to start by reading a section out of Matthew chapter 5. It's where we're going to be looking today. It's a famous passage. I imagine whether you grow up in church or you didn't, you will have heard this passage. But I'm going to read it just briefly for us, and then we're going to start to tackle it. It's Matthew chapter 5, verses 13 through 16. It's Jesus speaking in his Sermon on the Mount, his first public sermon. He's speaking to his disciples, but a crowd is gathering, so other people are listening in. Jew and Gentile who did not get along, male and female who were not supposed to be together, rich and poor. He's crossing all these boundaries and barriers to bring a truth to them. It's exactly what his word is doing for you and me today. Starting in verse 13. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and do what? Give glory to your Father who is in heaven. Today we're going to talk about Matthew 5, verses 13 through 16. We're going to talk about this truth that you are salt, you are light. And when I say the you, here's who I'm talking to. If you're here and you are a follower of Jesus Christ, you are a disciple, you are an apprentice of his. You are salt, whether you walk in it or not, whether you recognize it or not. You are light, whether you know it or not, whether you recognize it or not. But what is this theme between salt and light? What is Jesus' summary really teaching? What connects the dots between salt and light in these two illustrations Jesus is using that we'll break down in a moment? I'd put it before you as this. Today we are going to talk about church. Christian, follower of Jesus. Today we're going to talk about how you are a difference maker. You are a difference maker. This is true of you if you recognize that and you accept it. It is true of you if you, like a light hiding under a bushel, salt that has lost its saltiness that must be thrown out. Whether you don't recognize it, but here's something that's true of you. Your identity, Christian, is as a difference maker for the kingdom of God and the good of others. And the opportunity that we have before us is to really look at today. How effective are we at that? How are we doing it first, understanding that as an aspect of our identity, like who we are, what marks us and defines us? And then how are we doing in Jesus, him directing us to live that way, to respond, to walk in accordance with it? Because here's what's true. Think about the year 2020. We are in desperate need of difference makers. I imagine many of you might have come across this article. I've seen it in news publications. I've heard it in media interviews. I've heard it in sermons done, and I do think it's apt. I think there's an accuracy to it, which is why it connects. I don't know who first started the idea, but there's a summary perspective of the year 2020. And I say, here's kind of what the year 2020 has been combined into. It's much like the year 1918. 1918, if you know, breakout of the Spanish flu. It's like we took 1918 and we put it in 2020. Then they jump to 1929. That's the year of the Great Depression. Or you might say 2008, the recession that came, jumps to those years. And hey, we took what happened in 1918, the Spanish flu, 1929, an economic depression, highest unemployment rate. And we put it in 2020. Then we took the racial tension, the overt sin of racism that it is, and its destructive qualities against the Imago Dei that was discussed, rightly fought for throughout the 1960s, and the tension and the division, and we put that in 2020. You came, and there's no real year they can associate this with directly, but you could come and you could talk about different political scandals or moments. You could talk about Watergate, or you could talk about a Clinton impeachment, and you could talk about a presidential impeachment. You could talk about the political disunity and discord that's coming, where right now agreeableness is at an all-time low. 2020. Regardless of your view on if that language is hyperbolic or dramatic or if it is accurate, here's what I imagine you feel even as you're winding down 2020. This world, this country, our state, this city, your neighborhood, your family, my family, your church, my church. We are in need of difference makers. Those who, as ambassadors of Jesus Christ, because he's the ultimate difference maker, who know that they are salt, who know that they are light. And here's a beautiful thing. Not only does it then glorify God in the blessing of the people, when you and I live this way, it's the best life we're ever going to live. Does it mean you won't be in the midst of a year that can be marked by 1918, 1929, the pain of the 60s, political turmoil? No, you'll live in it, but in the midst of the difficulty, you will have an uncommon peace. Like a sense of joy and hope and purpose about how God might use you, work through you, and see lives changing. Church, that's what he wants for you. That's what he wants for me. That is who he's made you to be. You are a difference maker. Today, we want us to recognize the truth of that. And then we want to talk about how we walk in response to that. So again, we'll be in Matthew 5, 13 through 16. I just love the Bible. And it's such an apt time, especially as we head in the Advent season towards Christmas and the celebration of Christ. At a time when in my own life, materialism can be an all-time high, distraction, and how do you come and plan everything and you get lost in the busyness and the travels and the family planning, but then COVID, and do you gather as a family, and how do you do it, and what restrictions do you set? All of that. We are in need of people who have uncommon faithfulness because they're salt, because they are light. You are light, you are salt. As I said, Jesus, he's teaching right in his first public sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. We just came out of the Beatitudes. That's what Garrison taught us through. How Jesus, he has this upside down kingdom where what pursues a blessed life and a happiness is oftentimes what culture is in contrast to. And now he's going to come and he's going to say the way you and I are meant to stand out. He's going to give illustrations of salt and light. The first one we're going to talk about is salt, though. I'm going to jump back in. I'm going to read verse 13 of Matthew chapter 5. Jesus speaking to his disciples, but again, there's a crowd overhearing him. He says this: "You are the salt of the earth." Identity statement. Remember that. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. Church, Christian, follower of Jesus, you are a difference maker. The first reason, whether you recognize this and live in response or not, that you are a difference maker, that I am a difference maker, is because you are salt. Now, salt, Jesus, he's going to start by first defining salt. We'll talk about that. But then from that, he's going to almost talk about saltiness. He goes from defining to directing how we are to live as salt. What does it mean, though, to be defined as salt? What does that mean? There's a lot of ways to answer that. There's a lot of ways, and if you grew up in church, you've perhaps heard sermons on this, and all those sermons were accurate. They were right. They were true. You could define it as what is true of a salt. Salt is a preservative. What does it do? It preserves meat. And then the connection you could make, what is the church? What are Christians meant to do? We are a preservative in culture. We act as righteousness exalting, evil restraining. That would be true. You could come and you could talk about what is salt. Salt's a seasoning. It comes and it brings flavor. Like you put salt on meat and it just pops. Christian, what are you and I meant to do? We are meant to enhance life. You're meant to be a blessing where you go. You're meant to give life. You're meant to be marked by a sense of joy and purpose. You're a difference maker. You could talk about how salt, it was extremely valuable. Salt in this time, it was viewed even as a commodity. Romans, they actually said there were two things that were most precious to life. The first was the sun, because it brought light and rays to bring growth. The second, they said, was salt. Salt was extremely valuable. We could talk about how, Christian, you are precious. Like even in the midst of a season where as you move towards Christmas, like alcohol, addiction, things scale up. Why? Holidays bring hard times. You are not immune to wanting to cope, whether it be through gluttony and overeating, through Netflix and binge watching, through grabbing a bottle, through checking out and denying of your own sin, through whatever it would be. And it's oftentimes because at our core, there's a sense of inadequacy, worthlessness, or we are not precious. Christian, you are precious. You are salt. You could define it this way. You could talk about how salt, it's meant to be spread out, because if it clumps somewhere, it's just too much. It doesn't taste good. It actually brings death if you put too much in one spot. So Christians, we are meant to go and spread out. We're not meant to be a clump of just rotting salt. You could talk about that. You could talk about how salt, it was used in first century. If you had a cut or a wound, they'd actually come, and to bring healing, they'd treat it with salt. They'd pack that wound. What was true when they did that? That hurt. That hurt. I've never personally done that, right? I've done the antiseptic stuff. I'm too wimpy for that, right? But it would hurt. And you could talk about how a Christian's role is to bring healing. But oftentimes as we come and we address wounds in the lives of others, as the Spirit comes or his people come and address wounds in our life, it first starts by it hurts though. And there's an act of faith of trusting that healing comes. You could define salt in all those ways. Here's a summary statement, though. Salt is vital to every aspect of life. But I want to describe it a little differently. Having done that background, I want to describe it a little differently today. Because Jesus, he's going to connect the dots of not just you are salt, but from salt. Live salty. Live faithfully. Be effective. Walk with Christ. To be salt, it means to be like Christ. Very complicated, I know. You are salt, which means, Christian, the Spirit of God resides within you. He calls you to represent and be like his Son. To be salt is to be like Christ. That's why Jesus then, he shifts and he starts talking about how your saltiness or your Christ-likeness, it matters. Jesus goes from defining, and this is where we talk about, then he starts directing followers to live salty. If salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It's not good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. Oftentimes, especially around this region, salt from the Sea of Galilee, or the Dead Sea, they'd come and they'd get clumps from that. They'd come, they'd put it on food. At times, though, they'd go to take a bite, and that salt, it would taste rotten. Its saltiness had been gone. What would they do? And this was like a cultural mandate. You would not come and take that salt, and you wouldn't throw it back in the water. You wouldn't come and take that salt and throw it in the grass or throw it in a garden. Why? It would bring death. They would throw that salt directly into the road. They didn't want things to grow on the road. They knew it would be trampled under people's feet. The salt was not effective. You couldn't use it. Jesus is switching and he's saying, here's who you are. Know this. No, Christian, you are salt. Your identity from the beginning, if you accept Jesus as your Savior by faith, he's made you all of this to be like him. Salt. But your saltiness, my saltiness, it matters. I recently picked up smoking. I thought that was going to be funnier. I haven't actually. I've literally planned that joke for like 2 weeks. I'm so glad to be back. What I mean by that, and if you're here and you smoke, whatever, we love you. We're glad you're here. I bought a smoker, right? Like a grill where you smoke meat, you do all that kind of stuff. A couple of y'all are tracking with me. Yeah, bad joke. I'm back. I really did miss y'all. But I bought one of those. My family came into town not long ago. When I got it, I was newer to it. I was starting to figure it out. They came into town, and I bought a pork butt. It's what you make pulled pork sandwiches out of. It was going to take me 8 hours. I watched all these YouTube videos. I prepped. I had this right seasoning. I come, and I get it out. And man, you are supposed to salt that thing. And when I say salt, I mean salt. And I go, and I put all the salt on it. I think I do it right. I come, I set it on the smoker. It's going to go for 8 hours. It's like this building masterpiece where the entire time you're just excited. Your whole family's in town from Georgia. My wife's there. Like, I'm doing it. It's the most like masculine thing. I've never really hunted, and I'm not opposed to it. Never really done it. This is like the closest thing to like, I did that. Yeah, and I'm coming to prepare all this. I pull it off the smoker. I take it inside. I get those little tongs you can like separate, and I immediately, it's just falling apart. I'm not even having to like shred anything. It's just falling apart. The next thing though, I go take a bite. Juicy, good, not enough salt. Immediately I knew it. Not enough salt. But you know what me and my stupid cooking, wannabe masculine chef poser self did? I immediately started to act like it had enough salt. Yeah. What I mean by that is, I didn't say that part publicly. I go and I take it to the table, I set it all out, I even try to start eating some of it, and I just realize, you know what this needs? Salt. And I say to my dad, hey, Dad, will you pass the salt? Here's the reason I reference that. I think a lot of times Christians have a tendency to do with faithfulness what I was doing with a silly meal. We come, and yes, there's an aspect of salt to your life. It's not only who you are if you believe in Jesus, but you are aspiring to grow in that by the way you love him, or you want to focus this time of year about him, or the way that you are trying to lead differently in how you go about the workplace, the way you are trying to steward finances or respond culturally and politically in a way that is winsome but honest to the different tensions that we're facing. You are striving to grow in that. There's salt. But I think we all know something. We're far less salty than what we should be. And if you're like me, I have a tendency to kind of build up the appearance of my saltiness more than I do to steward actually out of fear and love and reverence before a king that was born in a manger. Actually take serious being salty. You are a difference maker. You are salt, but often what can hold us back is we care more about the appearance of being salty than actually being salty. It can happen to me. This past week, again, I was in quarantine, so I stood in the back. What that means is I had a whole week, and I worked during it, there are highs and lows, all of that. But I had a unique week to come and connect with God. I had some extra time. Were there ways that I did that uniquely? Yes. Were there ways that I got after it especially? Yes. But were there ways, like for example, yesterday, my wife and I, we were at Home Depot. I was out of quarantine. And she just looks at me, or she says on the phone, "Hey, John, I feel like right now, the problem in this situation is your attitude." And then immediately I'm on the other side of the phone, and I'm just like, "Oh, you think?" And I didn't even have the righteousness in me to say, "Hey, you're right." But I had enough salt to just say, "Okay." You could come and you could connect that to the dots. One of the ways that I could be more salty, I'm reading through the book of Ecclesiastes in chapter 6. There's two of the most convicting verses for me personally. I'm paraphrasing, but it says in there, and this is an aspect of being salty, to be like Christ. It says in there, hey, don't take it so personal when people say mean things to you. And then he says, why? In wisdom literature, because you have said mean things to be personal to others in the past. It's the idea of you've really wanted grace when you have done this, so extend grace when they do this. Don't take it personal. I have a problem with that. Oftentimes, we have a problem with appearance of saltiness more than actual saltiness in our life. So if saltiness means to be like Christ, you can do this in 1,000 ways, church. This can show up in the way that you fight to resolve conflict. This can show up how at the end of the year, you come and you sit with your family around a table and you say, hey, mom and dad have the privilege of stewarding this much money to give away. It's all God's. Hey, family, where do we want to give it? You're called to be a joyful, a cheerful giver. That's not a plug for you to give it here. Give where your heart leads you. But you see, that's a total different stewardship than how do we come and culturally stand out and say, how many presents could we put under the tree? I'm not opposed to the presents, but I'm absolutely opposed to children not seeing in parents a deep desire to be a difference maker, to live that out as salt. One of the ways you and I can be salt is in the midst of a time and a season where dissension, disunity, disagreement, and then just yelling at people, it's like a trend. It's a fad. Satan's loving it. Is to be a calming presence in the room. You know how much grace comes when we just do that? When you feel the room escalating, and you, by the power of the Spirit of God within you, and even when you want to just bow up, good sense makes one slow to anger. And it's to your glory to overlook an offense. And before you respond to them, you preach to you. You're a difference maker. You are salt. You are to be like Christ. This matters, church. This matters. Let's keep looking, though. As Jesus, he's saying that you and I, church, we are difference makers. His first illustration is salt. His second one, and it's one he uses all the time, it's light. Usually he's talking about himself. Here, he talks about you and me. I'm going to jump back into the passage, and we're going to read again verses 14 through 16. Matthew 5, 14 through 16. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand. And it gives light to all in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. The last point we talked about is we're working through. Here's who you are. In Advent season, out of Advent season, if you are a believer in Jesus, you are a difference maker. Jesus is defining you as that. He's making that your identity. But from that identity, he's saying, hey, we're going to walk in that way. You see this all throughout the Bible. He defines and then he directs. He says, this is who you are. And then because of who you are, here's how we are to live. He first defined you and me as salt. Now he defines the followers of Christ. He says, you are light. Light's a beautiful thing. Like in darkness, you see it. There's just an intrinsic sense of like purity to it and hope, comfort, and assurance. My daughter, she's almost 4. The last thing I do when I'm tucking her into bed before I pray with her, so I turn on a nightlight. There's just something comforting about it. It helps you see the path. It helps guide you where you are meant to go. That's who you are. Jesus defines us as that. Jesus, again, as I said, he will define himself as the light. You and I are a light. The light within us comes from him. You don't work for it. You believe in him. And that's how you receive it. But when you receive it, it's who you are. But here's what's true. The reason Jesus is saying you can be a light and hide it under a bushel in a house, what does that mean? It's ineffective and it's unfruitful. It brings no good to the house. You can't see by it. Jesus is literally using an example that is nonsensical, where they would have heard that and been like, that doesn't even make sense. Why would anyone do that? Or to say it differently, a city set on a hill cannot be hidden. The crowd would have heard that. Disciples would have heard that and been like, yeah, duh. And Jesus is pointing out a sense of that is exactly what happens when followers of his who have a light that he has granted to them, when they hide that light. And Christian, here's the truth. You can choose to hide that light. And that light, I would tell you, it's a light of faith. It never goes out. If you are a follower of Christ, you are his. You are his forever. Why? Not because of anything you've done, but because he died for you. You are his. But that light, if your life is like mine and what Scripture says is true, and it is, it does kind of act like it's on a dimmer switch. One of the things that I love about this visual is it's a sense that who you are has purpose. Who you are is a difference maker. What does light do? Brings comfort, brings direction, it brings hope, it brings solace. You are a difference maker. You are light, and you don't even deserve it. I sure don't. But it's who he made me to be, and it is nonsensical when, whether because of pressure from others like people-pleasing or insecurity, Christians try to hide that. They don't shine that. It is nonsensical and opposed to God when folks come and we hide behind, and there's such like a Christian false humility to this. Well, I don't know, and I don't know if I know enough. I don't know if I can shine brightly enough. No. You are light. Just go. It's who you are. It is an aspect of a way that you and I make a difference, and it matters that we make a difference. This is why Jesus says, don't hide cities on hills. Don't put light under basket. Why? Because light oftentimes, the faith, what does it always do? It evidences itself in a faithfulness. That faithfulness is meant to shine to others. There is a world that sits in darkness. They do not know the hope of God. That Christmas to them, and I understand it, and if this is you, it's great, and I think Christians get caught up in this. Christmas to them, it literally is. It's just a Christmas tree. It's just presents under. It is just the hope of Santa. It could come with a nice like family nostalgia and tradition and connection. I'm not opposed to any of that, but their hope is not in the reality of a baby born in a manger 2,000 years ago who came to live a perfect life, to die for their sins, and apart from him, there is no hope. That's darkness. You are light. Light is always meant to overcome darkness. Let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven. The first time I read that verse publicly, I think I was 12. I grew up in a Methodist church. And it was great. Confirmation process. And I guess they saw a sense of, well, John's not that terrified to speak publicly. And I went, and I can remember, man, I was shaken. And I just had to read that verse. The next time I would be on that stage, right? No, or second to next time. It would be right after I was graduating high school. I'd kind of grown up like a culturally Christian person, considered myself a follower of Jesus. I was not a follower of Jesus. I was confused. I was backwards. And I literally, before I went up, I was going to be a part of a mission team that was going to a foreign country to bring the hope of the gospel. I'd recently graduated high school. And I was going up on that stage, and someone had to comment to me, hey, you smell like you're still drunk. When the pastor comes to pray, don't open your mouth. I went up on stage. Got prayed for. I'm not even opposed to being drunk in church. I'm just saying there's an aspect of that category of my life where I wasn't light. Not even the light switch, it wasn't on. But even now, having come to know Jesus Christ, saved by grace through faith, receiving a light through him, there's times where I do want to hide it. There's times where I sit around tables and it's easier to not represent my faith. I imagine there's times where you come the holiday season, you gather with family, maybe you want to do traditions differently, or you want to really try and make it about Christ, but you're the strange one, or your whole family, they don't even believe in Jesus. And so when you come, it's like an individual faith that you fight for, and then you just try to demonstrate love, knowing the entire gathering, it's kind of like a powder keg just waiting to go off. Regardless of your background, your situation, here's what's true. If you're a follower of Jesus Christ, you have light in you. He gave it to you. It is his. It cannot go out. You are a difference maker because of it. You are meant to not hide that. You are meant to shine that brightly. He loves you. It's who he's made you to be. What I want to do is we kind of recap some of this. As we've talked about, you are a difference maker, church. Christ, he's defining people, and then he's beginning to direct them, and here's how you are to make a difference. Here's how effectiveness, here's how you steward it, here's how you use that for influence. I want to talk about what are some of the ways that we really do this. So if to be salty means to be like Christ, what are some of the ways we can be like Christ and make a difference? As I shared before, there's an infinite number of these. We talked about how for me, some of those, it's not take things so personally. I have a problem with that. For some of us, what that looks like is not being easily offended and ready to just bow up over everything. Your patience is meant to be a long fuse, not a short one. For some of us, being salty, what it looks like is recognizing that we gave up on being salty some time ago. That we cared far more for the appearance of it than actually being it. Whether we may not come and put on our Sunday best in terms of clothes, but man, when we get around these certain people, man, all of a sudden the polished version of us comes out. Jesus is just after you. He just wants the integrity of you. For some of us, being salty, it looks like taking serious sin in our world. At a time, especially you think about this culturally, all people are doing is fighting to be heard. And the way they're doing that is they are screaming at the other. You want to be salty? Adopt a posture of listening. That can be true if you're talking about COVID and response. That can be true if you're talking about the economy and stimulus and where it comes. That can be true when you are talking about racism and its impact and the reality of its pervasiveness. That can be true about politics and where things goes. Listen. Respect. Salty matters. What are some of the ways that you and I can grow in being salty, though, besides just what we do? One, and there's a ton of these. This is a laundry list. A spiritual pursuit of God. You will not remain salty if you do not connect with him through his word. You won't. You will not remain and grow in salt and vibrance and preservation and value and all that. Pray. Talk with him. Community. If you want to be salty, you are not meant to go it alone. If not here, you need to run with other Christians who take being a difference maker seriously somewhere. 3, you want to be salty? This doesn't preach great, but we preach it all the time. Seriously go to war with your sin. I know that you and I are experts in everybody else's sin. I know I can be. But you take serious your sin, your entitlement, the fact that sometimes people in your life have to walk on eggshells around you for fear they might say the wrong thing. Your greed, your gluttony, your prejudice, your apathy. What are some of the things that keep us from being salty? I want to put one before us. There's a whole lot here, but I'm going to put one. We think we already are. This one, this happens to me. We think, because we play this comparison game, when the only one we can really compare to is Jesus Christ, who's the ultimate fulfillment of salt. And we look around and we say, well, I'm doing better than them. I'm doing better than them. The minute you do that, you demonstrate your absence of being like Christ. Here's the second reason. I think this also happens to me. Is we think we're supposed to already have this done. We think we're supposed to already have arrived. People tend to view the Christian journey like a sprint. You know, oftentimes you may have heard it say, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. I think that's true, but here's the deal. It's a marathon where you crawl. I heard a pastor recently describe it this way, and I think understanding this is what gives a sense of hope to being salty. He described it in a way of, hey, I cannot see my child grow because I watch my child every day. I don't notice the difference. But I can look back on photos and I see there's huge change. Church, that's meant to be us in the spiritual journey. You are meant to faithfully, by God's power, crawl your way towards glory with the help of his Spirit. Don't be discouraged when you're not already there. God loves and celebrates our attempts at faithfulness, even our failed ones. You got to believe that. Those are some of the ways that you and I can not only live as salt in the season, but those are some of the ways you and I can grow in saltiness. And those are 2 of the ways that at times we're kept from that. We think we already are, and then we expect to have it already done. What about light? What are some of the different ways that you and I come and we can demonstrate light? We've talked about a lot of those, but what are a few things that you, this season, you can do? One, remember, Jesus, he's defining, he's granting identity in his first public sermon. You must know who you are. A simple way to think about this, if someone was to ask you, and you don't have to be a weird Christian in the way you answer this question every time, but if someone was to ask you, right? So, who are you? Who are you? And you start to answer that, right? Some of you might say, well, hey, I'm a physician. I'm Doug's son. I'm a pastor. I'm a teacher. I'm a brother. I'm a son. I'm a father. I'm a mother. Your identity as a difference maker, you must fight to always realize the first thing when anyone asks you, who are you? I am a Christian. I'm a follower of Christ. And I go by the name of John. And I am a husband. I am a father. I am a pastor. But the first thing that defines me is Christian. I'm his. I'm made new. The second thing that I think can come when you want to think about how you grow in being light, sometimes I can get it mixed up. I think we can get it mixed up where we think, well, I am light. Why? Because I do all this for the food bank, which is wonderful. I do all this in this area, or I lead the Bible study, or I lead the community group, or the way that I'm caring for my parents, or the way that I steward my finances. And we start to go and say, well, this category of my life, I'm getting it done. I am light. Guys, light shines into everything. Morality, theology. The way you interact with family, the way you steward your money, the way you recognize purity, the way you deal with every aspect of your life. Light isn't categorized. Light can't help but be present. Final thought I want to share with you guys as we close. In your life right now, you watching at home, in your life right now, what honestly keeps you from being salty, being like Christ? What honestly keeps you from shining brightly? What honestly keeps you from even though you wouldn't like to admit it, and it's hard to admit it, and I get all that, but the light that you have, if you're really honest, it's perhaps more covered by a bushel. What would all that mean? What would all that come to represent? What holds you back, salt and light? Perhaps for some of us, it's because we care way too much what everybody else thinks about us. Your family, your friends, your employers, the people at school that you sit across from at a lunch table. What will they think about me if I represent this, or if I say that, if I be like Christ in this moment, or I shine brightly even in the midst of darkness? Will they not be my friend? Will it change my job? Will they look at me differently? Will all of a sudden there be a tension that shows up at a dinner table? You can't control that. What keeps you? Is it fear of others? Is it selfishness within you? Is it you honestly saying, hey, I like making my life about me. I like life just being comfortable and easy. Because you got to remember, Jesus just taught salt and light coming out of the Beatitudes. He just taught salt and light, recognizing there's going to be difficulty. Blessed are those who mourn. Blessed are those who hunger and who thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are those who are persecuted for my sake. You want to sign up? You want to go? It's a better life. What keeps you? I hope this, though, as you think about what keeps you, I hope there's something that comforts you, though. You and I, we're never going to be salty enough. I will never shine bright enough. I could shine brighter. I could be more salty. But I will never come and represent Christ in all the ways that I intend or in all the ways that I hope. I am a spiritual letdown. I won't be the father that God fully intends. I won't be the husband that God would fully ask. I won't be the pastor that the Springs fully deserves. But there's one who stands in the gap when I fall short of being fully light. There's one who stands in the gap when I fall short of being salt. There's one who stands in the gap when I'm not the difference maker that he fully intends me to be. His name is Jesus Christ. He is the one that as you come and you fight to make a difference, you do so for his glory, for his good. Because you do so recognizing he was born in a manger for you. He knows your name. He knows the number of hairs on your head. He knows all your dysfunction, and he died for it. He knows the fact that you and I, even as followers of him, sit in unconfessed self-righteousness, looking down on others when we reek of foolishness. And he says, mine. Child, daughter, son, difference maker, salt, light. And he comes and he helps. He comes and he helps. Let me pray. Father, I thank you for the privilege that we have to come and to gather around your word, to reflect on the truth that you have made us difference makers. We don't do it for us, but because of you. And you so love us. It's the kindest thing that anyone has ever done and will ever do. When they looked through us, they see you. But God, I so have a tendency to get in the way of that sometimes. I still have a tendency to come and make it about me, not about you. To not be like Christ, to not live as salt, to not shine brightly, to live as light. And the difference I make, it's not always the right one. I thank you for your grace. I thank you that the first truth of making me a difference maker is making me yours. I pray that would be true of this body. We would know that we are yours. We are forgiven. We are free. We don't work for it. We believe. But from that, God, we want to make a difference for you. Use us. You are looking to use people for your name. This text says so. So God, find us faithful. Use us. May we take it serious in our own lives. We need your help to do that. It's in your name that we pray. Amen. I want to ask you guys here in person, as well as those watching with us online at home. In a few moments, for those of us who are here who are followers of Jesus Christ, we're going to take communion together. I'd ask as the band has come up for the first set of this song, just stay seated. Reflect on what he's done to grant you the truth that you are a difference maker. The way that you are a difference maker is he died in your place. He broke his body. He shed his blood. After we've spent some time reflecting and the band sings over, those of us here as well as those at home, a friend of mine, Fred, he'll come up and he'll lead us in remembering Christ and what he's done. And we'll finish out a song and we'll get out of here.